So picture this. A major, kind of unprecedented summit is happening at the White House. You've got world leaders flying in for one single massive reason, trying to finally broker an end to the war in Ukraine. Yeah, at President Trump's request, you have European heads of state, the head of NATO, and Ukraine's president all in Washington. And the whole point, they said, wasn't to talk about more war, but to actually huddle up and figure out a path to peace, to stop the bloodshed. The goal, put really simply, was just to stop the killing. And the hope was that this pretty extraordinary meeting could be the thing that finally leads to some kind of lasting deal.
But of course, while all these high-stakes diplomatic talks are going on thousands of miles away in D.C.,
The reality on the ground in Ukraine was telling a completely different story. Just as leaders were talking about peace, Russia was sending its own deadly message. 10. That's how many people, including a 1-year-old child, were killed in a new wave of Russian attacks. It's just a grim, awful contrast to what was being said at the summit. So how are we supposed to make sense of this contradiction? Well, it turns out there are two very different ways of looking at this whole thing. Okay, so first up is what we'll call Narrative 1, the pragmatic peacemaker. This is the view you'll hear from supporters, who see this whole summit as the work of a uniquely effective leader. So from this perspective, people are pointing to a bunch of bold, pretty unconventional moves. Things like opening up a direct line of communication that broke the stalemate with Putin, using economic muscle like tariffs and energy deals, and even, get this, calling Putin in the middle of the meeting to try and push things forward. And, this approach really seemed to be getting somewhere. You had European leaders who hadn't seen much hope for a real dialogue flying all the way across the Atlantic. Some, like Ursula von der Leyen, even gave President Trump direct credit for creating this new opening for peace.
supporters will also show you this chart, which shows a huge shift in public opinion inside Ukraine. Look at this. At the beginning of the war, only about 22% of Ukrainians wanted to negotiate. Now, that number has jumped to almost 70%. For people who believe in this approach, it's a clear signal that the brutal reality of the war has made finding peace the top priority.
So, to sum up this first view, a strong dealmaker used pragmatic tactics to achieve what looks like a historic breakthrough. But that is definitely not the only way to look at what happened. So let's dive into the second, much more skeptical narrative. All right, narrative 2, the skeptical view. Now, this perspective, which you'll hear from a lot of analysts and news outlets, agrees that the meeting was a big deal, but it's also full of caution, and it focuses on all the massive, complicated problems that are still there. For the skeptics, this summit basically raised way more questions than it answered. Like, does Putin actually want peace, or is he just using this to buy time and regroup his forces? Are the European leaders just trying to manage an unpredictable situation? And, the really big one, where are the details? What are the specifics on security guarantees or peacekeeping forces? The argument here is that the devil is in all those details that haven't been worked out yet.
Foreign policy expert Richard Haass really gets to the heart of this skepticism. As he points out, Putin's goal has always been about way more than just grabbing territory. It's about wiping out Ukraine's very identity as its own independent, Western-leaning country. So the real question is Putin really, truly willing to walk away from that goal?
So ultimately, the skeptical view is this. Hey, getting everyone to sit down in the same room is great. It's a positive step. But the really hard part of any negotiation, the actual terms of the deal, that hasn't even started. And that brings us right back from all the high-level analysis in Washington to the stark, brutal reality of the war itself. Because you have to remember, even while all those leaders were meeting, Russian attacks were still happening all across Ukraine. They were hitting a residential building in Kharkiv, shopping centers in the middle of the country, a university, the power grid. This push for peace didn't mean a pause in the fighting. Not at all. And the human cost is just staggering. In that attack on Kharkiv, an entire family was wiped out. A neighbor said she had just seen their little 1-year-old daughter, Mia, taking her very first steps. I mean, this is the reality happening behind all the diplomatic headlines. And the voice of a survivor from that very same attack really says what millions of people are feeling in this one simple sentence. I just want it all to end. So if a deal is ever going to happen, what are the actual hurdles they have to get over? It turns out it really boils down to two gigantic issues. Yep, two enormous sticking points. First, security. What kind of concrete guarantees can Ukraine get to make sure this never, ever happens again? And second, land.
the unbelievably difficult question of what to do with the Ukrainian territory that Russia is currently occupying.
So what even is a security guarantee? Well, it's a formal promise that other countries will come and defend you if you're attacked. And for Ukraine, this is everything. You have to remember, back in 1994, they gave up their nuclear weapons in exchange for so-called assurances that turned out to be completely worthless. Now there's a new proposal on the table that's stronger, but it's still not that ironclad all-for-one protection you get with full NATO membership. And then you get to the land issue. And here, it's fascinating. The very words people use are part of the fight. Some people call it a land swap, right? That sounds kind of fair, like a mutual exchange. But others are insisting on the term land transfer, because that frames it as what they see it as, a one-sided concession of sovereign territory to an invading country. The language itself completely shapes the debate. So when you put it all together, we're left with this picture of deep, deep uncertainty. You've got this powerful push for peace on one side, but it's clashing with these huge strategic roadblocks and the brutal, ongoing reality of the war. Which really leaves us with the central question here. Was this summit a real historic breakthrough that's putting us on the path to a lasting peace? Or was it just the beginning of a very fragile truce, one that's built on a shaky foundation of unresolved conflict? Right now, the world is watching, and that answer, well, it just hasn't been written yet.